Seattle does not announce rain. It simply begins. By 7:45 that Thursday morning, the city was already saturated, the kind of slow October drizzle that soaks through jackets without drama, that turns every window into a blurred portrait of the street below. The towers of the financial district stood gray and indifferent against a grayer sky, their glass faces reflecting clouds back at clouds. On the 52nd floor of the Laurent Global Holdings Tower, the conference room had been set for a board meeting that everyone in the building already knew the outcome of. The chairs were leather. The table was Brazilian rosewood, 22 feet long. A single arrangement of white peonies, Isabella's preference, not her father's, had replaced the standing order of yellow roses that Victor Laurent had kept in this room for 31 years. The yellow roses had been removed on Monday. Victor had died on Sunday. Isabella Laurent walked into the room at precisely 8 o'clock. She wore charcoal gray. Her hair was pulled back without a strand out of place. She carried a single leather portfolio and set it at the head of the table as though placing a flag. There was no theater in the gesture. It was simply the motion of a woman who had been preparing for this moment for the better part of a decade, and who had arrived. Preston Ashford was already seated 2 chairs to the left of the head. He stood when she entered, which she acknowledged with the briefest nod. Evelyn Cross was at the far end, reviewing something on her tablet. Margaret Holt sat near the windows, her reading glasses on, a document in her hands that she had been holding, not reading since she arrived 20 minutes ago. 6 other board members filtered in over the next 5 minutes. They all greeted Isabella the way people greet someone who has already won, with a particular warmth that is partly congratulation and partly the instinct to be remembered as someone who was kind at the right moment. By 8:15, everyone was seated. Margaret Holt set down the document she had not been reading. "Before we begin the formal session," Margaret said, "there is a procedural matter." Isabella looked at her. "The succession ratification can proceed without." "There is a procedural matter," Margaret said again, gently. The gentleness was the thing that made it land harder. Isabella paused. At that moment, the door to the conference room opened. The man who entered was not what any of them expected, though none of them, if asked later, could have articulated exactly what they had expected instead. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark wool overcoat that was still damp along the shoulders from the rain. He had the kind of face that did not perform anything, not confidence, not apology, not the faint obsequiousness that visitors to rooms like this one usually carried. He looked around the table once, the way a person looks at a room they are about to work in, and then he set a legal-sized envelope on the nearest flat surface and said, "My name is Daniel Hayes. I apologize for the rain." He gestured toward the water beading on his coat sleeve. One of the junior associates near the door almost laughed. It wasn't a joke, he just meant it literally, and that somehow made it stranger. "I was asked to be here at 8:15, Daniel continued, "by the office of Hartwell and Crane, who manage Victor Laurent's estate. I believe Margaret Holt can confirm." Every head at the table turned to Margaret. Margaret did not look surprised. She looked like a person who has been carrying a weight for a long time, and has finally been permitted to set it down. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "please take a seat." "What is this?" Isabella said. Her voice was even. It was the evenness of a person who has not yet decided how much alarm is appropriate. According to the terms of Victor Laurent's last will and testament, executed 14 months ago and filed with the court, Margaret said, "Mr. Hayes is named as the primary successor to Victor's controlling interest in Laurent Global Holdings." The room was quiet for 2 seconds. Then Preston Ashford said, "I'm sorry," and then several voices at once, and underneath it all, a sound that was almost a laugh from Isabella, not the full thing yet, just its first breath. She was looking at Daniel Hayes with the expression of someone who has encountered a clerical error so large it has briefly become amusing. "You are," she said slowly, "the new heir of this company." Daniel looked at her directly. "That's what it says." She did laugh then, fully, briefly, without cruelty, but without warmth, either the laugh of a woman who has been handed something too absurd to treat seriously. Security, she said, already opening her portfolio. Daniel did not move. He reached into the envelope. What he placed on the table was not theatrical. It was simply a packet of documents, clipped together, with a cover sheet bearing the letterhead of Hartwell and Crane and the date of Victor Laurent's signature. The will, Daniel said, was notarized by 3 independent attorneys, witnessed by 2 individuals unconnected to the Laurent estate, and has already been admitted to probate. Page 1 is the summary. Page 4 is the asset schedule. The last page. He paused. I'd suggest reading the last page. Margaret slid a copy of the same packet to Isabella. Isabella did not reach for it immediately. She was still looking at Daniel with that particular expression, not contempt exactly, more the careful attention of someone deciding whether a thing is worth their full focus. Before I read anything, she said, I'd like to know who you are, because my father's name was known to every serious person in this industry, and yours is not. I know, Daniel said, so explain the connection. I'd rather you read first. Your reaction will be more honest if you haven't heard my version of it. Something shifted in the room, a small, almost imperceptible rebalancing. Evelyn Cross, at the far end of the table, looked up from her tablet and did not look back down. Isabella opened the packet. She read quickly the summary, the asset transfer clauses, the controlling interest percentages. Her face remained composed. Then she reached the last page. There was a handwritten addendum, in Victor Laurent's distinctive slanted script. The ink was dark blue. The handwriting was the handwriting of a man who wrote slowly and meant everything he wrote. My successor will not be my daughter. Isabella is exceptional. She is the sharpest mind I have ever developed. But she still believes that speed is the same thing as vision, and that winning is the same thing as understanding. She is not ready to protect what I built, not because she lacks the intelligence, but because she has not yet been made to wait for anything. Daniel Hayes has been waiting his entire life. He has never asked for more than what was required. He sees clearly because he has no use for being seen. This is not a punishment for Isabella. It is a gift I am not sure she will accept. The room had gone completely still. Isabella set the last page down. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel Hayes, and the laugh was entirely gone. All right, she said. Sit down. The board did not adjourn. It recessed for 40 minutes while Evelyn Cross and her team ran a background compilation on Daniel Hayes, the kind that, in a normal context, would take a week and a proper legal mandate. What they found was thin in all the ways that money usually makes things fat. Daniel Hayes. Born 1986, Portland, Oregon. Degree in Computer Science from the University of Washington, 2009. 2 years at a mid-size software firm in Bellevue, then a decade of independent contract work systems architecture, primarily for mid-market logistics companies. No criminal record, no litigation history, no financial irregularities. He owned a house in a quiet suburb 22 minutes northeast of the city. He had 1 child, Sophie Hayes, age 7, currently in 2nd grade at Northgate Elementary. The child's mother was not in the picture, no further detail in the public record. He drove a 4-year-old Subaru. He had no social presence to speak of. His annual income, best estimate, was solidly middle class, the income of a person who was good at what he did and had never tried to turn that into something larger. Preston Ashford looked at the summary sheet and said, "This makes no sense." "It makes complete sense," Margaret Holt said, "if you understand what Victor was looking for." "And what was Victor looking for?" Ashford said. "Someone who wasn't looking for anything." When the board reconvened, Isabella was at the head of the table again. Daniel was seated at the far end, not at the foot, but near it. He had removed his coat. He was wearing a dark sweater and had a notebook open in front of him, but was not writing in it. "You said my father trusted you," Isabella said. "That's not an explanation." "No," Daniel agreed. "It isn't." "Then give me one." He looked at the table for a moment, not evasively, but the way a person looks when they are organizing something internally before they speak. 10 years ago, he said, I had a small company. We built routing optimization software for regional freight carriers. Victor found us through a mutual contact and invested not through Laurent Global, personally. He asked me not to disclose his involvement, and I didn't. The company didn't grow the way either of us hoped. We shut it down after 3 years. What happened to his investment? He lost most of it. Daniel paused. He didn't seem to care about that part. What did he care about? He kept meeting with me afterward. For years. We'd have lunch, sometimes just coffee. He'd ask what I was working on. He'd talk about problems at Laurent Global, not details, just structural things, strategic things. I thought he was using me as a sounding board, an outside perspective. He was testing you? Margaret said quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand that now. I didn't then. Isabella said nothing. She was watching him with the full, measuring attention she normally reserved for acquisition targets. He never told you he was considering this? She said. He told me, about 8 months ago, that he wanted to make sure certain things were protected after he was gone. He asked if I would be willing to help. I said yes. I didn't know the specifics of what that meant until I received the call from Hartwell and Crane on Sunday. The day he died, the room held that for a moment. Then Evelyn Cross said, carefully, "What did you think he meant when he asked if you'd help?" Daniel considered the question honestly. I thought he meant he wanted someone to review some documents, make some phone calls. I thought he was asking for a few months of my time. And instead, Preston Ashford said flatly, he gave you the company. He gave me a responsibility, Daniel said. Those aren't the same thing. The official board session resumed at 2 in the afternoon. Before it did, Daniel asked if he could share something. He opened his notebook and removed a single folded page. Victor gave this to me 18 months ago. I didn't know what to do with it at the time. I kept it. He slid it to Margaret, who unfolded it and read it, and then passed it to Isabella without a word. It was a handwritten letter, not long, 2 paragraphs. Victor's handwriting again, the same deliberate blue ink. Daniel, I've spent 30 years building a company, and I've discovered something I should have known at the beginning. The hardest thing is not growth. It is continuity. Anyone can make a thing large. Almost no one can keep a thing true to what it was when it was just an idea. The people who will try to take Laurent Global apart after I'm gone will not come with threats. They will come with opportunities. They will make the dissolution of everything I care about look like progress. I need someone who can see that, someone who has no interest in being rewarded for seeing it. I think that person is you. I'm not asking you yet. I'm just telling you what I think. Victor. Isabella read it twice. When she set it down, she did not look at Daniel. She looked at the window, at the gray city, at the rain still moving against the glass in slow diagonal lines. He didn't tell me any of this, she said. It was not quite a statement and not quite a question. I think he thought it would complicate things, Daniel said. He was right. I know. She was quiet again. Then, the letter says, keep it true to what it was. What did he tell you it was, when it was just an idea? Daniel thought for a moment. He said it was a bet against short-term thinking. He said he started it because every company he watched growing up was built to be harvested, built to look like something real, and then sold at the peak before anyone noticed it was hollow. He wanted to build something that would still be running in 100 years. He said that was the only interesting project. Isabella finally looked at him. He said the same thing to me, she said quietly. When I was 12, something in the room relaxed by a fraction. Not much. But enough. The formal board session lasted 3 hours. In the middle of the second hour, Daniel asked to review the strategic contracts that had been finalized or were under final negotiation in the 60 days prior to Victor's death. Isabella hesitated. That's not standard procedure for. I understand, Daniel said. I'm asking anyway. Evelyn Cross exchanged a glance with Preston Ashford. The glance lasted less than a second, and Daniel caught it. There's something in the contract file, he said. Not a question. Another beat of silence. There's a partnership agreement in final draft, Evelyn said carefully, with Meridian Capital Group. It's been in development for about 8 months. It was going to be one of the first major announcements after the succession transition. Can I see it? The document was 47 pages. Daniel read it in just under 2 hours. While the board sat in various stages of managed impatience, and Isabella stood at the window, looking at the city as though the answer to something might be visible from the right angle. When Daniel finished, he closed the document and set it flat on the table and placed his hand on top of it in a way that was not dramatic. It simply looked like a person placing their hand on something they needed to think about. Who negotiated this? He said. Evelyn's team, primarily, with outside counsel, Preston said. And Victor knew about it? A pause. He was briefed in the early stages, Preston said. He expressed some reservations, but the terms evolved significantly since then. We believe he wouldn't have, Daniel said, not loudly, not harshly, simply as a factual statement made by someone who had thought about it. Excuse me? Evelyn said. Daniel opened the document to page 31. He turned it so the table could read it. Then he turned to page 44, then to an appendix near the back. Meridian Capital's share acquisition in this agreement is structured as a passive minority stake in year 1, but clauses 31.4b and 44.2 allow them to convert that stake to an active controlling position if Laurent Global's EBITDA margin falls below 18% for 2 consecutive quarters. Read alongside Appendix C, which defines EBITDA in a non-standard way that excludes 3 of Laurent's most significant reinvestment categories. This threshold is not an emergency trigger. It is an inevitability. Within 4 to 6 years, under any realistic growth scenario that involves the R&D investment this company needs, Meridian would exercise that conversion. The room was quiet. They would own this company, Daniel said. Not immediately, not visibly, but structurally, irreversibly. In year 5 or 6, Laurent Global would cease to be Laurent Global. It would be a Meridian portfolio asset. Evelyn's face had gone very still. Preston Ashford leaned forward and picked up the document and turned to page 31. He read. He turned to page 44. He read again. He set it down. We need outside counsel to review this interpretation, he said. Yes, Daniel agreed. You do. And when they do, they'll tell you the same thing. Because it isn't a complex interpretation, it's a straightforward reading of the plain language. It just requires reading all 3 sections together, which apparently no one did. He said it without accusation, which, somehow, was worse than accusation. The board meeting ended at 6:30 in the evening. Most of the members left with the careful quiet of people who were rearranging things internally and preferred to do it in private. Evelyn Cross left quickly, her tablet under her arm, not making eye contact. Preston Ashford lingered, asked Daniel 3 careful questions about his interpretation of the EBITDA clause, got 3 careful answers, and then left. Only Isabella remained in the conference room when Daniel began to put his notebook away. You didn't know about the Meridian contract before today, she said. How long did it take you to find the relevant clauses? About 40 minutes of actual reading. The rest was understanding the structure. She was at the head of the table now, turned sideways in her chair, one arm resting on the table. The aggressive composure of the morning had given way to something else, not softness. Exactly. But the thing that comes when a person stops performing confidence and starts actually using it. I approved that agreement in principle, she said. I read the full document. I have a finance team, a legal team, outside advisors. None of them flagged those clauses the way you just did. They may have been reading for what they expected to find, Daniel said. That happens. You weren't. I had no idea what to expect. That's a different kind of reading. She was quiet for a moment. My father wrote that I believe speed is the same as vision, she said. I read that. Do you think he was right? Daniel considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. with a kind of unhurried patience that was not indifference, but something closer to respect for the difficulty of things. "I think he was describing something real," Daniel said. "I think when you move fast enough, for long enough, it becomes difficult to distinguish between being ahead and being unmoored." Isabella said nothing. "That's not a criticism," he said. "It's a condition of a certain kind of success. You move fast because moving fast works. And then one day you're moving fast not because it works, but because that's the only way you know how to move. And the things that require stillness, they start to look like obstacles. And you're the man of stillness," she said. There was an edge in it, but it was a testing edge, not a hostile one. "I'm a man who has never been able to afford the other option," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you here?" she said. "Really? You had no obligation to show up to this building. You could have filed the legal documents, transferred the shares, and let the attorneys handle everything from a distance. You didn't have to walk into that room this morning." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Because I told Victor I would help protect what he built," he said. "I couldn't do that from a distance. I needed to see it." "And what did you see?" "A company that is very good at moving fast," he said. "And that needs, urgently, to learn how to be still." 3 days passed. On Sunday evening, Daniel sent a document to Margaret Holt with a request that it be distributed to the full board before Monday's session. It was titled simply, "Structural Recommendations, Laurent Global Holdings, Q4 Forward." It was 14 pages. Evelyn Cross read it on Sunday night and sent a message to Preston Ashford that said only, "We need to read this carefully." Preston read it at 6 in the morning and called Margaret before 7. When the board convened Monday at 9, the document was the first item of business. Daniel had not prepared slides. He sat at the same position he had occupied on Thursday, not at the head, not at the foot, but near the middle, and spoke from notes. The Meridian Agreement, he recommended, should be withdrawn, not renegotiated. Withdrawn. He had identified 2 alternative capital structures that could provide the liquidity Laurent needed for its AI infrastructure expansion without ceding any governance provisions. He had preliminary term sheets from both structures, developed over the weekend through 2 contacts he described briefly as former clients. In parallel, he recommended a restructuring of the technology division along lines that would position Laurent Global's existing logistics data assets as the foundational infrastructure layer for an AI services offering not a new business, but a maturation of what the company had been doing for 15 years, made legible to a new market. He proposed that the board consider shifting its advisory composition to include 2 external members with deep operating experience in infrastructure-scale AI systems. Finally, he proposed that Isabella Laurent be confirmed as CEO with immediate effect, with full operational authority. There was a long pause after he finished speaking. "You're proposing your own authority be subordinate," Preston said. "I'm proposing that operational authority belong with the person who has built this company operationally for the last 7 years, Daniel said. "Which is Isabella." Victor's concern wasn't about her ability to run the company. It was about who protected the company's identity when it came under pressure from capital. "That's a board-level function." "That's my function, if the board agrees." Isabella had been listening from the head of the table with an expression that was genuinely difficult to read. "You want to be chairman," she said. "I want to fulfill the responsibility Victor gave me. If that role is chairman, then yes. And in 6 months, when we disagree about something material, what happens? We argue about it," Daniel said. "And then we figure out who is right. And if it's me, then it's you." She looked at him for a long time. "You're serious," she said. "You have no interest in running a company with 30,000 employees and $4 billion in annual revenue. Genuinely none." She almost laughed. Not the laugh from Thursday, something different. Something quieter and less defensive. "Why not?" she said. "I have a 7-year-old who needs help with her math homework," he said. "That's more interesting to me than most things." The board voted on Wednesday afternoon. Margaret Holt read the motion aloud. to confirm Isabella Laurent as CEO and to appoint Daniel Hayes as chairman of the board, with the specific mandate of reviewing strategic and capital decisions above a defined threshold, consistent with the terms of Victor Laurent's succession document. The vote was 8-1. Preston Ashford was the one. He would come around within 6 weeks, as it turned out, after the outside counsel confirmed Daniel's reading of the Meridian contract, and a subsequent internal audit revealed 2 additional agreements with structurally similar provisions. But on Wednesday afternoon, he voted no, and his reasoning recorded in the minutes was that the structure was unprecedented and created unclear lines of governance authority. He was not wrong about that. It was unprecedented. It was also, by then, the only arrangement that made any structural sense. After the vote, the board members filtered out with the specific relief of people who have survived a week they did not expect. Margaret stayed. He loved her, you know, she said to Daniel. They were alone in the conference room. The rain had stopped sometime during the afternoon. The windows showed a city going gray toward evening. I know, Daniel said. He just didn't know how to give her what she needed without also protecting her from it. Parents, sometimes. She stopped. I'm sorry. You understand that better than most. Daniel said nothing. He talked about your daughter, Margaret said. Sophie. He said you were the only person he knew who had genuinely chosen ordinary life and found it sufficient. He said that? He said it was the rarest thing he'd ever encountered. He found it clarifying. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, he never told me he had a daughter who didn't know about any of this. I wish he had. He thought you might have told her. I would have. I know. That's why he didn't. Margaret folded her reading glasses and put them in her pocket. She's going to be extraordinary, Daniel. She already is. She just needed someone to hold the line long enough for her to see it. She saw it herself, Daniel said. I just read a contract. It was Friday, 8 days after the Thursday of rain, when Isabella came to find Daniel. He was not in the building. He had spent the week attending only the sessions he was required to attend, and spending the rest of his time in a small borrowed office on the 41st floor, working through the company's vendor contracts and reading the strategic planning documents from the last 5 years. Isabella found him there at 5:30 on Friday evening. He was on the phone. Briefly she heard him say, "Yes, she's at my mom's. I'll pick her up by 7, and then he saw her in the doorway and ended the call. I won't keep you, Isabella said. It's fine, sit down. She came in, but didn't sit. She stood near the window in a way that reminded him of the way she had stood in the main conference room on Thursday, looking at something outside, or pretending to. I went back through my father's calendar, she said. The last 2 years. He met with you 11 times. About that. He met with me 41 times. I know. I was always the plan, she said. Not you, I was always the plan. He just needed someone to what? Catch me if I fell? Be the guardrail? Daniel considered how to answer that. I think, he said, he needed someone who wasn't going to benefit from your mistakes. Everyone around you has something to gain from your success and something to lose from your failure. That creates a kind of distortion. People tell you what they think you need to hear. Not always what's true. Victor wanted someone in the room who had no stake in the outcome. You have a stake now, she said. You're chairman. I have a responsibility. That's different from a stake. I don't need this to go a particular way. I need it to go a true way. She turned from the window. That's a very convenient philosophy, she said. For someone who just inherited control of a $4 billion company. I didn't inherit control, he said. I inherited a mandate. There's a meaningful difference. She looked at him. I've been running this company for 7 years, she said. I turned a $200 million division into our largest revenue segment. I built the logistics AI partnership from a napkin concept to a $50 million contract. I did that. Yes, Daniel said. And my father thought that wasn't enough. Your father thought it was extraordinary, Daniel said. He wrote it down. I've read everything he wrote about you in the context of succession planning. He was not ambivalent about your ability. He was concerned about one specific thing. Speed, she said. Not speed. The Meridian contract wasn't a fast decision, it was years in development. The issue was something closer to momentum. When something has enough velocity, it becomes difficult to see where it's going rather than just that it's moving. She was quiet. The Meridian contract was a good deal on paper, she said finally. It cost her something to say it. It still is, structurally, except for those 3 clauses. If we can renegotiate those terms, that's worth exploring, Daniel said. You really don't have an opinion? I have an opinion about the specific provisions that would give Meridian governance rights. Beyond that, it's a capital decision, and you understand this company's capital needs better than I do. She studied him for a moment. Who are you, actually? She said. It was a genuine question, the kind you ask when you've stopped trying to categorize someone. A systems engineer from the north end of the city, he said. Who happened to build a company at the right moment and meet your father at the right moment, and who made a promise to a man I respected, and who has to pick up his daughter by 7. And who has to pick up his daughter by 7, he agreed. Something shifted in Isabella's face, something small and quiet, the way things shift when a person stops holding a position they've been holding out of habit. I'm going to make a lot of decisions you disagree with, she said. Probably. And you're genuinely going to argue with me and then defer if I'm right? And if you're right, then I'll say so until you see it. And then you'll make the call. She thought about that. That sounds exhausting, she said. That's governance, Daniel said. Everything else is management. She almost smiled. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday, the rain returned. It came the same way it always came to Seattle in October, without announcement, without violence, simply as a condition of the world, gray and fine and persistent. Daniel dropped Sophie at school at 8:15. She had a spelling test. She had been nervous about the word necessary, and he had helped her remember it with a mnemonic 1 collar, 2 socks that she repeated 7 times on the drive and then said she had it and didn't need to repeat it again. He watched her walk through the school doors. He sat in the parking lot for a moment before pulling out. He was thinking about a clause in a vendor agreement he needed to review. He was thinking about a call he needed to return to one of the 2 alternative capital contacts. He was thinking about the fact that Sophie had mentioned, twice this week, that her teacher had suggested she might be ready for advanced reading, and that he needed to follow up on that. The Laurent Global Tower was 22 minutes away in morning traffic. He took the long route. On the 52nd floor, Isabella was already at the head of the conference table when the rest of the board arrived. She had changed something. It was a small thing, and most of the board members didn't consciously notice it. But the yellow roses were back on the side table, a fresh arrangement, just placed. Not her preference, her father's. Margaret Holt noticed. She sat down and looked at the roses and looked at Isabella and didn't say anything. The agenda for the morning was the restructured capital framework, the early-stage AI services proposal, and an initial review of board composition changes. 3 items, ambitious for a single session, but not unreasonable. Isabella opened the meeting. We have a lot to cover, she said, and I want to do it properly, which means we take the time it takes. Preston Ashford looked up from his materials. He had never once, in 11 years of board membership, heard Isabella Laurent tell a room to slow down. Let's begin with the capital framework, she said. I want to understand every clause before we move forward. That is the new standard in this room. The meeting began. Daniel arrived 12 minutes late. There had been a delay on the bridge and slipped into his chair near the middle of the table without ceremony. He opened his notebook. He found the page in the capital document that was under discussion. He read. Isabella did not acknowledge his arrival. She was mid-sentence on a point about the covenant structure in the alternative term sheets. She was asking good questions, the kind that cut directly to the structural issue and ignored the peripheral noise. Margaret Holt, across the table, caught Daniel's eye briefly. The look lasted half a second. He knew, the look said. He knew what she was. Daniel looked back at the document. Outside, the rain moved steadily against the glass of the 52nd floor. The city was gray and indifferent and ongoing. The way cities are buildings and traffic and the slow machinery of 10,000 ordinary lives running in parallel. In the conference room, a company was beginning again. Not loudly, not with ceremony. Just a room full of people, doing the difficult, necessary, ordinary work of understanding a thing before they moved. That evening, Sophie asked him how his day was. He was making pasta. She was at the kitchen table, her spelling test folded in her backpack, with a 96 written at the top in red ink she had gotten necessary right and misspelled separate, which was fair. Long, he said. Was it the company stuff? Yeah. Do you like it? He thought about that while he stirred. I like that it matters, he said. She considered this. Does it matter more than normal stuff? She said. No, he said. Different stuff matters in different ways. Like how my spelling test matters to me but not to the company. Exactly like that. She seemed satisfied with this. Dad, she said, after a moment. Yeah? I already know separate. I just forgot on the test. I know, he said. It's separate. Like separate has a rat in it. That's a good way to remember it. I came up with that myself. I know you did. He put the pasta on the table. She got her own fork without being asked. Outside, the rain had not stopped. It continued at the same slow October pace, steady and without comment, the way it always did. In the morning, he would go back to the building with the glass windows and the Brazilian rosewood table and the woman who was learning. At some cost and with some grace, that the most important decisions were the ones that required stillness. Tonight, he had pasta to eat and a 7-year-old to sit with. The work would wait. It always did.